All right, welcome to today's work and session around the fire with Jim Highsmith, and it's in the Busihub group. Welcome. Um, we have Jim in our midst, who, to my knowledge, is a long-standing Agile community pillar. And Jim, you're calling in from Denver, Colorado, that's surrounding, I believe. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, welcome. We are here at 7 o'clock in the afternoon, evening CET. What's the time and the mood in your place? Is it waking up mood or is it?
It's about 11 a.m.
All right, so the coffee is
nearly
done?
nearly time for lunch.
All right, that's a good thing. Yeah, welcome. Yeah, and I had a look in both your website, where currently your new book is also being advertised next to all the other books that you have written in the past years. Probably ideas from Wild West to Agile are coming up in this interview, I can imagine. But also, I've looked at your LinkedIn profile, so it gives a bit more a clearer view also how you contributed to the business world. Are there some highlights that you'd like to give from your big oeuvre of work?
Well, let me give just a couple of highlights, and then you can ask me some other questions. So one of the highlights of who I am is my family. And this has a lot to do with, I actually wrote the book initially as a memoir to my grandkids. And then I realized it maybe had a wider appeal. So I put it in form of a book. So this is my daughter on the right and my grandson, Zach, and his girlfriend on the left. And this is family is really important to me in terms of the 60 years that I put into software development. Something else that's really important to me is adventures. So this is El Dorado Peak in the Cascade Mountains. And this is one where you really don't want to fall off either side. And if the guy in front falls off to the right and you're in the back, you need to jump off to the left. So
yeah.
So those are two things that have really impacted my life, and family and adventure. And when I got started in computing, this was what computers looked like. And so you had this guy sitting here with punch cards going in and printed paper going out. When I was working in my early days, this sometimes took overnight to get your results. So can you imagine somebody sitting down today at a terminal and hitting the enter key and having a 12-hour response time? So that's what we actually had back in those days, was about 12 to 24-hour response time. And so our tools were a compiler. And our testing tool was, if you had a bug in the program, it gave you a core dump of all of memory in hexadecimal. And so you had to read the hexadecimal. That was our testing environment. So you went from that to what you have today. So here's a family sitting down here today with all kinds of devices, laptop, iPhone, TV. And so it's a hugely different environment today than it was 60 years ago. And so part of what I wanted to do was convey how the technology, how the business changes impacted software development over that period of time. So that's really kind of where I started from.
Mm-hmm. And the pictures that you show, they both of the pictures, they show the interaction of the human, let's say the human interface with the machine.
Right.
How is that for you personally? Did you start out being someone who does code work, etc., and then move away from the machine, or how was that for you?
Well, initially I did, I was a developer, and back in those days, you did it all. You did everything from the analysis to the design, to the programming, to the testing, to the implementation. I even on occasion went into the mainframe computer room and operated a computer. So you'd never get to do that today. So that was kind of the environment back then. And I moved more into project management and management after that, and also into methodology and design and requirements and database design and some of those kinds of things. And I did less coding than I did in the beginning. And then I moved into, like I say, into methodology, and then eventually into Agile. And so in some ways, the book is my journey to Agile and then what happened after Agile. So about half the book is focused on the Agile Manifesto, what went before, what came after, why it was important, what are some of the issues with it. And I have a lot of case studies about things that worked and things that didn't work very well.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And we'll have some time to explore certain angles. Also, if you're with us today, you can easily drop a message in the chat and we can tweak that in. Or if you feel like, oh, but I've got an immediate question, let's see how we can bring that into the conversation. So don't hesitate. You're here and it's good to spend the valuable time together. When you shared that, Jim, about how you started out as a coder and you did everything, actually, it's not just filling in the work, but also the design, etc. It strikes me that it's actually a one-man multidisciplinary team nowadays. Like we became so many that all of this work started to be, growing away from each other. And then with the agile ways of thinking, we say, no, put that again close to each other. Does that make sense to kind of?
Yeah, one of the things that is a little bit subtle about the previous to Agile, where we used the waterfall methodology primarily. And by the way, that was a result of a misinterpretation of a paper that Walker Royce wrote back in the early 1980s. So he actually said, don't do waterfall development, do iterative development. But the diagram that people kind of picked up on was the waterfall diagram. And so that got carried forward. And a little bit of that was because that's the way people operated at the time. And you were just having some project management stuff and come out. And the project management stuff was all kind of based on construction and those kinds of projects. So it was waterfall. But what happened was you had a waterfall for the methodology, analysis design, or planning, analysis design, programming, testing. And that became how it was organized. So you had an analyst group, design group, programming group, a database group, and a programming group, and a testing group. And then those were hooked together via documentation. And so it became less and less of a team effort and more of an individual group effort that was disconnected. And I think that was one of the main reasons that when Agile came along, we brought those people together into a co-located team. And that was what a lot of people were doing during that period of time also.
Mm-hmm. It's funny to me the way you describe what happened with the paper in the 1980s and how it was perhaps misinterpreted, because with my background of human behavior, if you say to someone, don't do this, their brain registers do it. And also it's funny that people react on the icon or the picture. That's typical human browse behavior that is maybe nowadays more apparent than in the past, but yeah. I laughed about it for that reason.
So let me give you an example of what happened during the 1990s. And I call this the roots of Agile period, when things were kind of bubbling up and people were somewhat dissatisfied with the status quo, which was waterfall. But I was called into a project at Nike in Beaverton, Oregon, the shoe manufacturer, apparel manufacturer. And they had a project that was doing waterfall. And it had taken them 18 months to produce a requirements document that was then out of date. And the users were not really happy about that. And so this was in like 1995. So waterfall was still the prevalent approach. But I had developed what I call a rapid application development approach, or RAD approach, which was gaining some traction during that period of time. And so I went into Nike. A friend of mine knew what I was doing. He introduced me to the VP of IT. And I went in. My biggest question when I went into the interview to try to get the job was what to wear. Because Nike was a very informal place. So I didn't want to get, all dressed up in a suit and tie. But I did want to look nice. So I got nice casual business attire and red Nike running shoes. Mm-hmm. And the executive noticed the shoes and I got the job. Yeah. And so I worked with him over the
story. Yeah. How also I can imagine that if you represent new ways of working in those clothes, then perhaps also agility feels more cool and out there, so easier to pick up on.
Yeah, yeah. And Nike's a cool organization. It's not the normal button-down organization. All the buildings are named for sports heroes, like the Michael Jordan building. And then all the conference rooms are named for other sports people, like Pete Maravich's building or Pete Maravich's room. So, in a big corporation, you're invited to a meeting that says, go to room 13-122, right?
Yeah, it feels funny. It feels
Nike,
different
you go
from
to
the name.
Right. At Nike, you go to room building Michael Jordan, room, some other athlete,
Yeah.
And so it's a very different environment. So I worked with them to put together a system, and we did it in 6 months with 1 month iterations, and it worked out very well. And so this, like I said, this was 1995. So it was one of the engagements that I had that sort of proved to me that, in fact, this style of working would work.
Yeah. And if you, maybe a bigger zoom out this is, but if you would say, hey, you're sharing these stories of how things used to be in perhaps software development or in a broader IT environment. And the question would be for you also, okay, so how does that knowing your history matter today?
Well, I think just as I say in the book, one of the catch phrases I have is, we study history not so we can predict the future, but so we can prepare for it. And so I think a knowledge of history, when I talk to people and I ask them if they knew about structured methods or they knew about the people who were important in early software engineering development work, they don't know these people. They know Ruby and Agile and Azure. They don't know anything about their history. And so I think it's really important, and some other people do too. And it seems to be something that people are interested in now. Just little things. For example, here's a very minor point. In the 1990s, because of the use of personal computers and some rapid application development tools like spreadsheets that did just come along, people started doing what was called end user computing. And they did some good things. They got some business benefit out of it, but they also got themselves in a lot of trouble because they didn't know how to code. They didn't know how to do testing. And so they messed up a lot of spreadsheets in businesses. So is the same sort of thing happening now with one code, no code, or low code, no code? It's a similar kind of tool in similar kinds of hands. Would it have similar kinds of repercussions? So could we learn something from looking back? And that's just a minor part. Can we look back, for example, today, 23 years later, and ask the question, why was the Agile Manifesto so successful? And will the answer to those questions help us in the future? So that's the kind of thing that I hope to bring out. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for making us be able to look back and to bring it into the now and to see the line of improvements and the stories that came with it. That I also ordered your book for this reason. So thank you for offering that. Beyond your grandkids, that originally you intended it for. I've recently followed something online and it's coming back more often. And it was a debate like, the agile consultants, coaches, people who help Scrum Masters, they're not so good nowadays. They're not so good. They have to be educated, was that line of thinking. And why do they have to be educated? Well, in this case, they don't know their stuff. They don't know how to do a value stream overview, and they don't know who has to work with whom, and they don't know these kinds of things. And we just have psychologists nowadays that we have to hire, like people who just talk nice with people, coaches, life coaches, but they don't know their stuff. So about that maybe moving away from technical to maybe more social, is there anything you see in that respect, or a message that you have about this, or what would you say?
Well, the social stuff is always important, and so we thought about the social stuff a lot when we were doing the original manifesto, or when we were working in those early years. So we thought a lot about the social stuff. And it tickles me sometimes when I hear people say the Agile Manifesto authors didn't think about X. But I was 23 years ago. Of course, we didn't think about eggs. And so I go back to Jerry Weinberg, law of raspberry jam. The wider you spread it, the thinner it gets. And so when you take any kind of movement like Agile or any kind of management trend, the further it gets dispersed, the thinner it gets. And so what's happened is you've got it dispersed a long ways, in organizations throughout the world. And as it goes further and further, it gets thinner and thinner. So what we have to do is we have to build up the lumps. We have to look at where does it need to be enhanced. So what is it that's long-term, the reason Agile has been so important, and what do we need to do today to sort of improve it? Mm-hmm. Somebody, you may ask the question sort of about the Agile movement splintering. And I would say the Agile movement is branching. And it's a very different kind of idea in that it is definitely branched out into multiple different kinds of things: Kanban, DevOps, Lean, Less, Edge, Safe, Disciplined Agile. And is that a splintering or is that a branching? I would consider it a branching that basically uses the same fundamental premises as the Agile original did. So I think there's definitely a room to do more and do better and do different things. But I think that's just an extension of the Agile movement, not trying to get rid of it, although some people definitely are.
But that's interesting that you say that, because in coding, and it's not my background, but in coding, when we create a branch, it has to, at a certain moment, probably be integrated back into the trunk, into the place you actually need it. And maybe a lot of Agilists that were there for some time, they feel like they belong to that hub, the center. And then others who may have branched out or splintered, or depending on the way you look at it, they're not the right kind of people. So that's kind of maybe an age long, it's almost a religious conversation of how it is close to the manifesto, or it's just, it's too far off. For instance, a lot of times we look at, for instance, disciplined Agile, and it's bought and used by PMI, project and program management. And in your view, that's actually interesting, because how another kind of world, another kind of way of working, project and program management, can use the manifesto, that's great. Right. But to others, it's like it's diluting the real deal.
Yeah. By the way, I know Scott Ambler, who originated Disciplined Agile, and I've always liked Scott, and he was a really good Agilist. He just picked a bad name because it says that the rest of Agile is undisciplined, which I don't believe. There's a difference in my mind between discipline and formality, and sometimes we get them mixed up, and we think something is informal is not disciplined. But I'll tell you, take an XP team that's doing all the practices of XP and put them in a room, and I guarantee you that they're really effective. And I think you're right. I think the branching is a little bit different, because I think it branches for the core. What I would like to see done now, in fact, in some of the stuff I've written a kind of a challenge to the current Agilist is, again, what is it about the Agile Manifesto and what followed that is the reason it has lasted for 23 years? In the era of trends, that's a long time. Yeah. And it has splintered some, but what is it? How do we maybe need to return to what that core is? And I'll tell you that I find that there are a couple of different ways of interpreting the manifesto. One is to interpret it as this is the word, this is the religion, this is what we should be doing. And there's another way to interpret it, which is it's a direction, a guide. It can be interpreted in a slightly different way. So, for example, take the one about the fact that delivered software is the only outcome. So I can look at that and I can say, well, product or services, not just code, is an outcome of what we're doing. Yeah. So if you look at, for example, when I wrote a project management book in 2005, I've got a different set of values in there than the Agile Manifesto value, but I can track them all back to the Agile Manifesto. Yeah. So there are different wordings, different interpretations of that. And I think those kinds of things are fine because that extends what the manifesto is talking about.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the constructionists versus the interpreters of the U.S. Constitution. Some people want a very strict, this is the way. They wrote it down 300 years ago, and this is the way it's going to be today. As opposed to other people who say, we see the intent there, but this is a new time and needs to be interpreted in relationship to a new time. So I see some parallels there.
Yeah, it seems almost inherent to human that some humans also in religions, they go back to traditionalism and they keep to the letter of the rule, and the others, they keep to more the spirit and the idea behind it. Yeah.
Right. And I use the phrase sometimes prescriptive and adaptive agility. And prescriptive agility is an oxymoron, right? Because agility is not prescriptive. But I think some people interpret it like that. They take the 6 practices of Scrum or whatever, and they say, this is the rules, and we have to follow those rules. And if you don't follow those rules, you're not agile. Well, who's going to say who's agile and who's not agile? Ron Jeffries, who's an XP proponent, was asked at a conference years ago, if you followed the 12 principal practices of XP, were you agile? And Ron said, I don't know. He said, I don't follow them verbatim anymore. I just sort of, use them as I need them, and I use other things as I need it. And I feel like I'm agile, but just following those 12 practices doesn't necessarily make you agile.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And in the chat also, Julien and Paolo, they think with us and they say, isn't Agile just another transformation area needing more change managers? I think that's perhaps another such example of where Agile touched another field of expertise, right?
Yeah, in fact, I talk about that in the book a little bit, because I talk about the 3 eras of Agile. One being the kind of the first 4 or 5 years, which I call the rogue team era. And the second one I call the courageous executive era. And so what happened in the beginning is we just did some teams here and there. And so we would go into an organization and have 1 team or 2 teams, and we help them be agile, but the rest of the organization would stay the same. In about 2005, 2006, companies started thinking about, well, maybe I'd like the whole organization to go agile. And so I think there were some of us in the Agile movement who had enough change management background to help the teams, but we needed more help when we came to the bigger organizations. And so I think one of the skill sets that really needed to be brought in was organizational change and organizational management kinds of expertise into some of these bigger transformation efforts.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a wonder of Paolo who says, can we train people to have a passion at all? I think we need more motivators and leaders to carry the mission of, for instance, agility.
You can't train people to be passionate. Passion comes from internal. So let me give you an example of a passionate response. When we published the manifesto, Ward Cunningham put up the website, and he did a really unique thing. He didn't ask anybody, he just did it. And it was one of the best things that happened. He added to the manifesto a place where anybody could sign the manifesto and log on and say, they could put their name down, or they could write a paragraph about why they supported the manifesto or what they didn't like about the manifesto. And that listing between 2002 or 2001, when it got started, and 2013, which is the last data point I have, has 15,000 signatures.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the kind of passion and inspiration that the manifesto gave to people at that point in time, because they were operating in a very different environment. One that, for example, when you came out of an era in the 90s, when there was a lot of management effort put into the idea that you could automate just about any process, and that the people at the bottom end, in this case, programmers, you could just replace, kind of like pick and choose. It didn't really matter who you had or how skilled they were. You just kind of popped in a person and that was enough. And the developers, programmers during that era didn't like that approach very much. And so they saw something that actually made them more human. And I think those are the 2 things that ignited the passion around the manifesto. The fact that we wanted to build better software, and that's better software for the client and better software from an engineering standpoint. And then we focused on people and their empowerment and their inspiration and their passion. And I think that's what happened. And so I think you don't teach it, but you have to lead it. And I think the manifesto was, and the signatories was sort of that leading. And I see that in organizations today. You lead from the top with that kind of cultural transformation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and actually with giving those 2 points, building better software, the passion to do better, and people and their inspiration, their empowerment, you wanted to give people more, or people themselves, they recognize, hey, I need more space to do my work, really. Those were reasons why perhaps, in your view, Agile still hit it off so long. So for 23 years, it's it was relevant. It is relevant. Yeah.
And we sort of moved up the ladder. In the beginning, it was sort of development. Then it moved into project management. Then it moved into IT organizations. And now it's sort of like, people are talking about business agility. So it's sort of moved into that kind of category. And there's also been a push in the management arena towards greater and greater agility. So you'll look at some of the management books that have been written over the last 10, 15 years, and they're looking forward to more flexible, more adaptive, more agile organizations to deal with the issues of the day.
Yeah. And Joshua Kievsky, who I think he also signed, or he's on the book as person who subscribed to it. But
yeah, he's somebody I've worked with quite a bit, and he's one of the really good agile guys. I've worked with him I worked with him in several engagements in the U.S. and one in China and one in Australia and New Zealand. So he and I worked together quite a bit.
Yeah, he kind of, how would you say, updated the Agile Manifesto to be more forever, almost like modern Agile. He made it, and it says, well, care for people and that kind of stuff. How do you are you up to date with that? How do you view it?
I don't know exactly what he's done. I do know he's got a great new book out called The Joy of Agility, which which really is talking about agility, and a lot. And some of the stories he has in there are stories that we did together, and so it's a different look. Also, Alistair Coburn has something called The Heart of Agile, which he talks about. So there are different people that took and in some ways they're going back to the core message of the manifesto because they think that we've gotten too far off of that. Mm-hmm. And so I don't see the manifesto being rewritten. That was a particular time and place. You have to realize that at that point in 2001, the Agile or what was called the light methodology community was very small. Mm-hmm. Now it's huge. And I don't think you're going to write one manifesto that's going to satisfy all of those different people. Oh. And maybe not need to. So maybe what you need is 3 or 4 different kinds of manifestos for different branches of that tree. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. And building on what Julian is posting also in the chat, and I'll share it obviously, but he says, should the manifesto be revised or augmented? And we talked a little bit about that, but what if there should be now a new wave of something? A lot of people are waiting, what's next? And a lot of people then said, well, DevOps is next. And then the rebuttal was, yeah, but that's kind of the same, but, further in the same thought.
Right. To me, DevOps extends Agile, and it makes that last, from development to operations a lot smoother and a lot faster. And in fact, sometimes I think it's too fast. I think sometimes that today's Agile is too micro focused. It's, focused on delivering 57 features every day rather than what we're trying to do over some period of time. But that's another topic. Mm. But I think that in terms of the manifesto, like I said, it was at a certain time and place. And for example, I don't think you'd ever get those 17 people back together again. We've tried a couple of times, and some people are interested, a few people are interested, some people are not. And so you'd never get those people together. Could you get another bunch together? Well, who would you get? Would you get somebody from DevOps and somebody from Scrum and somebody from DSCM? It would be, and could you come up with something that was adequate or substantial or passionate or passionate dealing? out of one. So that's why I say maybe each major branch needs to update.
Yeah.
And do version that would benefit them.
And if you would zoom out of the immediate context of agility and the software development atmosphere, and we would say, well, what does business need nowadays? And I'm also referring to your statement that 2021 is the end that you describe as agile phases. That's perhaps because your book ended in that time. I don't know, but you say, well, it kind of ended there. Nowadays,
it ended for me.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the description.
One of the things that I talk about the book is that it is not the history of software development. It is a history of software development, and it's purely from my perspective of things that I worked on and worked in, and that's why I could have cut it off at 2021, because that's when I sort of retired. And so I tell people today that I'm sort of semi-retired, but it's turned out I'm more semi than retired.
Mm-hmm. And that's a truly postmodern statement. It's my reality instead of the reality. Yeah. And it fits actually with the Agile Manifesto feeling. And the idea like, hey, we're looking here for more space for people to do a good work. But then again, Julien is also saying, yeah, but having so many frameworks and so many people coming up with good ideas, it's also confusing. So it was a great time and place for that small group of lightweight people with lightweight methods to actually define something, and you didn't know it was going to hit off. Perhaps it fitted also in the zeitgeist, with Hegelian word. It fitted in that time. Could it be that sustainability after a profit? Then people were added, and now also the idea of planet. Could that be a new manifesto that we say, well, let's make a new manifesto and it will be about such a topic?
Well, let's think about that from the aspect of technology. So one of the things that I think is that I talk about is the fact that I think we're in a period of what I'd call an economic punctuated equilibrium. And a punctuated equilibrium is a biological term. And so one example of a punctuated equilibrium was the meteor that hit the planet and all the dinosaurs died out. So that was a punctuated equilibrium where it was a major, major change in the environment. 225 million years ago, there was another one where 96% of all living species died. And so a punctuated equilibrium is a big change. If you take a look at the pandemic, climate change, the Russian-Ukraine conflict, fragmented devices, geopolitics, new technologies such as AI, and social justice issues, all of those things are going to interact with each other in ways that we don't know what the outcome is going to be. And I think the tech community has got to step up to help solve those kinds of world issues. And I think the way we do that is by how we conduct ourselves and how we help, because I think any solutions to some of these issues has a tech component. I mean, can you think of a business initiative today that doesn't require some sort of tech behind it? I can't. There may be one, but most of it requires some sort of tech. So I think we've got to do sustainable tech that's relevant to the issues that we have today so that we can help address those issues. So to me, there's a bigger aspect of that. When I talk about software development, I talk in terms of methods, methodology, and mindset. And methods are things like a sprint review. Methodology is putting things together in some sort of life cycle. And then methods are what you believe in. They're your set of mindset or beliefs. And I think the belief in agility and adaptability is one that we need to continue to push and help people with in the technology arena.
Thank you. That really sounds also like a deeper mission that you speak about. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And how do you conduct that view? Who do you touch? How do you influence people to move in that direction and to have the same kind of dream of tech being important in the next level challenges and not just maybe with ChatGPT, etc., but also ethically and how to conduct yourself, as you say?
Well, I think part of it is we just got to talk about it. And that's one of the things that I hope this book will do. I'm going to leave this up to the next generation of Agilists. In fact, on a couple of things I've written recently, I've sort of challenged people, the new Agilists, to come up with some new things that address some of these issues. I actually think that agility is one that it's not going to go away. Agile may go away. Some of the Agile methodologies may go away, be replaced with what I'll call Excalibur, right? But I don't think the need to be Agile is going to go away anytime soon, based on the amount of change that I see coming. Not only the pace of change, but the magnitude of change is really something that I think we haven't dealt with very much. So, for example, the pandemic was a big magnitude of change. The climate change is going to go much slower, but it's going to be a huge magnitude. And so I think we have to deal not only with the increase in change, but also the magnitude of those change possibilities. And so I think, that I need to instill the newer Agilists hopefully with this mission. One of the things I talk about a little bit in the book is what drove me during this period of time, what drove me during this 60 years. And I didn't have a plan for my career. But one of the things that evolved over time is I developed a purpose for my career. And that purpose kind of carried me forward through all of the changes in my career here and there. But the purpose kind of stayed the same, even though I couldn't have articulated it 30 years ago like I can today. It was kind of in the back of my head. And so that's one of the things that I would convey to the newer people coming into the profession, is think in terms of what is your purpose that you would like to live towards, and how is that going to impact your career, as opposed to try to plan out your career moves. When I started, the career path was you hired onto one company, you worked there for 65 years or until you were 65, and then you retired. That was the model 40, 50 years ago. That's not the model today.
Well, the south of France still tries it, but I agree that that's rare. Yeah. Yeah, it's really good to hear you speak on how you connect the dots in between the years, and how you also see the relevance of, I would say, Agile with a small letter rather than perhaps Agile with a big letter. You say, well, next to Agile with a big letter is Excalibur, maybe a new method comes in, but being Agile is very relevant because of what you say, the pace and the magnitude of change. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, and thank you for this. And I also see that Simon, you add something in the chat as well. I didn't get a chance to read it, so I'll read it out loud. So you say, I find that when people get confused, that I bring them back to the Agile Manifesto, because the principles still bring clarity and simplicity. So it even now reminds people of what they're trying to do or trying differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the powers of the manifesto is its simplicity. It appears to be simple because it's only got 4 items in it. But those 4 items can be interpreted and expanded in multiple different ways, but you kind of come back to them. Some people have been concerned about the word over in the Agile Manifesto. Individuals and tools individuals and their interactions over process and tools. And a lot of people have interpreted it over as being in place, or replacing. So people in their interactions didn't replace process and tools. They're just more important. So it was a way to help make decisions rather than just say, we believe in this, we believe in this, we believe in this, we believe in this. Well, that list can go on forever. But when you put the over in there, it gives you a way to hopefully make decisions and understand the emphasis. The emphasis on people and their interactions. The emphasis is on outcomes. The emphasis is on exploring. So one of the big differences between then and now was the old style was what I call plan do. You planned it out in detail and then you did it. And any deviation from the plan was a mistake. Now it's more of an envision, explore. You envision into the future and you explore into that future and you adapt as you need to, as you learn from the reality. That's one of the ways that I use mountain climbing as an analogy. In mountain climbing, in mountaineering, you better pay attention to the weather and the conditions and alter your path as you go forward. You adapt to the conditions on the mountain as you go. And back in that period of time, there was you adapted to the plan in projects. You always tried to go back to the plan. You never tried to go off in a different direction, normally. And so it was a whole different way of looking at managing software development or any kind of project, because you adapted as the reality set in.
Mm-hmm. I like the ability to connect your field of work to the outside world. In your case, you do it with mountaineering, because it gives us really a new perspective of what we're trying to do. But then again, the world of work generally doesn't feel in the body as much as does the outside world, right? This is I think
that's right.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll change some. So there are two aspects of the mountaineering. One is the analogy that I just talked about. The second one is, if you want to have a really agile organization, I think you have to have some people in it who are adventurous, who are willing to take some risk, who are willing to go out on a limb. If you don't have anybody in your organization you can point to and say, they're adventurous at work, just like they're adventurous outdoors, or they're adventurous at work because they try these different things. If you can't find somebody that's an adventurous and somewhat of a nonconformist, you're not going to be very successful at doing agile.
Yeah. And that also refers to being anarchists, right? As subscribers, you're anarchists looking at the people still. Yeah.
Right.
How do you go about being, or how do you do with people who treat you like some kind of an oracle? Because you have been signing that manifesto at one time, so now you're an oracle, and you will tell everything about Agile in any context. Because if you feel like good with it, there's a good question in the chat that we can pose to you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how that goes. I don't feel like an oracle, but one of the things I realized as I've been working on this book and getting back in touch with people, I do a fair amount of posting on LinkedIn, which I hadn't really done previous. And one of the things that that's really interesting for me is that I'm at an age where people can say, well, he's just some old guy, he's not worth listening to. But I actually think I have some influence over people. So that's kind of nice to learn, as I get along. I mean, I have teenage grandkids, and some of them and my kids are older than a lot of the people entering the profession today. So it's nice to have an idea that's what I have to say still has some relevance and some impact.
Mm-hmm. And when you respond to that, I wonder, so Omkar, he's sharing in the chat that he says, well, could you help me a little bit here? So how can I use Agile in manufacturing projects or NPD projects? I don't know what you mean, Omkar. Maybe, Jim, do you have an idea of NPD project?
No.
So maybe...
new product development. Well, It's interesting. The project management book that I wrote talks about product development in general, not just in software development. And there was a project I did, this was 2005, 2007, somewhere along there, that I write up in the book, where we worked with a medical instrument manufacturer in Canada. And we started out working, in fact, this was one of the ones that Josh Kiriaski and I worked on together. We started out doing software development, and we ended up working with their hardware development teams. And so for example, they had electrical engineers and systems engineers and mechanical engineers and other kinds of engineers. They had scientists, and they all worked in the separate areas of the building. We put them all together in the same area and in a collaborative work environment. And so we actually instilled some of the Agile principles into the hardware group. And so there's a case study on that in the book. And it worked really well. The only thing we never got them to do is we never got them to do pair electrical engineering.
Pair work. No.
And adapting Agile software development to Agile hardware development was not the easiest thing in the world. There is some adaptation that's necessarily got to take place. But I think this idea of iterative learning is what you're doing when you're doing Agile. You're doing iterative learning is valid for any kind of product development.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we're coming close to also an end of our time together within this interview. And when you speak on how to do the work, so Agile is not just Agile, Smagile, and follow the rules here, but it's a way of looking. So it's rather than planning everything out, it's the iterative movement, as you say.
Right.
And in that way, apparently in 1990s, it was perhaps more necessary to actually state that. And nowadays it's perhaps more obvious, but still a lot of organizations and a lot of parts of organizations, for instance, perhaps hardware more than elsewhere, they're using this plan first way. And Cynefin, you're probably familiar with that.
Yeah.
Are you?
I use that model in my book.
Yeah. So I think it's David Snowden who came up with that, or who brought it forward in his package, at least with Cynefin. That also suggests that you shouldn't use iterative development everywhere. So any views on that? That like, no, okay, so while Agile can spread to many areas, it's not to be used everywhere always. So how do you view that?
Well, the domain in which it works well was fairly small in the beginning. And I think we have expanded that domain as people have worked and said, okay, maybe it was for small teams in the beginning, but how would you get it to work for a team of a group of 100 people broken into sub-teams? And so over time, that domain in which it was useful has expanded. But I would still say that there are projects or products where maybe that's not the best way to do it. And I think it has to do with speed and uncertainty. As the uncertainty and the change happens, and you have technology that's brand new and you haven't used it before, and so you've got a lot of risk involved, I think you have to use some sort of iterative method. And I'll just say iterative method, not Agile method for that. If you have a project, for example, you've got a moving project where you're moving your offices from one building to another. You know everything there is. You know where the new offices, people are going to go into new offices. You know where the equipment goes. There's very little that's uncertain about that. And so there's no need to go through an iterative process. You could actually use a more traditional project management approach to that. And so you've got to look at the situation and say, in kind of some ways, how agile or how iterative do I need to be for this particular thing? And maybe I don't need to be very iterative. Mm-hmm. So you got to understand the domain you're working in and adjust. And I think that's been, in my experience, the hardest thing for people to learn is how to, no matter what methodology they're using, how to adjust it to their situation, because that takes some thought and some understanding and some experience. And that's where a lot of people are lacking. They just don't have the experience trying to do that.
Yeah. There's this saying, it goes beyond, but it's wisdom will help you distinguish when to do what. Yeah. So that's right. You're referring. And then there's something that often nowadays we end with a suggestion as such about the future. And you spoke a little bit about it, how perhaps also Agile and in technology, we have to adapt to the challenges at hand, and maybe in the conversations we have also. But now also there's a question of Paolo, any insight on how AI will influence the manifesto? And ChatGPT often is one of the things that we say, and what's next, but AI in general. Is it becoming part of the manifesto, or should we adapt to that? Or is that the invitation that you just gave to us? Like,
I would say that AI is one of the tools, and I'm not an expert on AI by any manner of means, but I think if you look at methods, methodology, and mindset, the tools of AI may help do things quicker. They may help quality. They may help quantity to some extent. But when I wrote the last chapter of the book, one of the things I started out with was to think I was going to do some prediction of what the future was going to be like. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try to predict the future. I'm going to try to help people prepare for it by giving them some history. And so I think that's really where I've come down, is I don't know where AI is going to go. You know, I mean, everybody's writing about AI today, and there's certainly more written about AI than is known.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I do know that how do we continue to install agility and adaptive leadership into our enterprises at all levels is one of the existential questions that we need to be facing, because I think that's the road to more aware businesses, you know, and stronger businesses and stronger response to some of the world's problems. So agility is one of those solutions,
Mm-hmm.
and it happens to be the one that I have something to deal with. So that's where I'll go with it.
Yeah. Thank you for your time with us today. It's really been valuable to hear you speak on these different insights and the questions that we had. So thanks for your time. I can imagine that as audience, you may want to tweet something into the world about this, or you may want to put on LinkedIn or in Busihub a little bit of your insights, like what stands out for you. So if you'd like to share that or think about that, maybe in the chat or maybe between now and when you post it, that's really great. And for you, Jim, how would you say you have done so many interviews and conversations lately, and also LinkedIn you use a lot. How is this work with Busihub for you? And can we have you on board for some while longer in Busihub?
Well, you know, Julian invited me to join, and I did join, and he immediately asked me to do this fireside chat, which I agreed to. So I really like the idea behind Busihub, and so I'll continue to be a member and contribute as I can.
All right.
So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you, Julian, also for hosting this again and for helping us with this, and for asking Jim on board. And it was really a great pleasure to be here. So if there's anything, Julian, that you want to share with us towards the end, then please.
So I wanted to thank Jim for your time. I appreciate it. And also Abram, I think you made it. We got a lot of insights, takeaways. And I hope to organize another session soon. I think this is recorded and I'm going to be distributing this, but valuable insights collected in this session for everyone. If there is any last question, we have 3 minutes from anyone on this call, Simon, Sandria, David, Onkar, or Paolo, please shoot. And I know that then we can let Jim run away.
I just want to say thank you. I mean, what a privilege to listen to this discussion. Jim, the Agile Manifesto has had such a big impact on me and the work that I've done over the years. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so if no question, we just close this session, and I hope to see you soon in due course.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, Jim. Thanks, Abram, and everyone else.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thanks so much, Abram.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.